Happy Wednesday! You're listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're covering a case that I've wanted to cover for a while, but it's also a case that I haven't seen covered by any other podcast, or at least not podcasts that I listen to. So this week we're covering the case of Megan Huntsman, and Megan was able to hide and have at least 7 different babies throughout the course of a 10-year period, but she killed and hid all of them. And she was able to do this without her husband, any of her family members, or any of her friends ever suspecting that she was ever even pregnant. This case does involve the murder of infants. I won't be going into very graphic detail, but if you cannot mentally handle listening to this episode right now, like if you're a new mom or you're an expecting mom and you just don't want to hear about infants being murdered, that's perfectly fine. I completely understand. Just come back next week and I'll have you a brand new case that doesn't involve a child. Maybe we can do like a survival story next week, or even send me your suggestions for cases that you'd like to see covered for next week. You can send them to me on social media, or you can email them over to mamamurderedapodcast@gmail.com. So with that being said, this one deserves a trigger warning, and without further ado, let's get it. Now, I normally try to start in chronological order from the birth of whoever I'm telling you about, and then go all the way up to the date that things go south, because on a true crime podcast, things are always going south at some point or another within the story. So I'm going to be covering this one just a little bit different. There was just a lot within this case, and I figured I could make more sense if I tried to explain it this way. So I'm going to be doing just a little bit of jumping back and forth in the timeline, but like I said, just a little bit, and I'll do it in a way to make sure that it all makes sense for everybody. But this case is absolutely insane. Megan Huntsman was born on February 27th in 1975 to her parents Blaine Huntsman and Joy Nelson, which Blaine is such a cool name. Let's just say that first. And Megan was born in Pleasant Grove, Utah, which is like a little south of Salt Lake City. And in and around this area, almost everybody practices the Mormon faith. And from what I could find, it legit seems like everyone in this area is Mormon. Megan came from a good family. There was no drug use or domestic violence. There was nothing in Megan's upbringing that would have thrown up any kind of red flags for anybody around her. She didn't have any kind of childhood trauma that was later revealed, like nothing. It seems like Megan actually came from a pretty good family that was loving and supportive. And we all know by now that in most of these true crime cases, the perpetrator or murderer ends up revealing some kind of childhood trauma later on. But that's not really the case with Megan. Even after her crimes were revealed, her family stuck right by her side and even played with the courts during her sentencing. They were saying that, yes, what she did was awful, but she was still a good person. So, a really good family, a pretty normal childhood, no abuse of any kind, and nothing really of substance was ever reported to have happened during Megan's, childhood and up into adulthood. And although Megan seemed to have come from a pretty good household with pretty good parents, she was reportedly an extreme introvert. Like, she was extremely private with everyone in her life, and she kept damn near everything to herself. Like, she didn't share her thoughts, her feelings, her fears with anybody around her. Even the people that she was close with, like even family members and friends that she was close with, said that you would only ever get to know Megan on a surface level. That she didn't let you get to know her beyond that. But Megan was also always really active, and everybody says that Megan was just the sweetest thing. And Megan did have a small circle of friends that she was close with, and they often did like normal childhood things like sleepovers and bike rides, and she just never really let anybody get close to her. Like, I feel like most teenagers, especially girls, they normally go through this phase in like middle school or high school where they have 1 or 2 people that they're really, really close with, and during sleepovers and things like that, they end up having like these super emotional, super meaningful, long conversations about what they want out of life and what they've been thinking or feeling, and it just seems like Megan never really did that. She never shared her emotions, her feelings, her fears with anybody, not even her closest friends. Megan was also notoriously known for not asking for help from anybody. She was just the type that would figure things out on her own, and she tried really hard not to be a burden to other people with her problems or life choices. And Megan was so good at not asking for help that it was like she was almost good at it to a fault. And you'll see what I mean by this a little bit later as we get deeper into this. Newsflash, sometimes we all need help in one way or another, and despite the world we live in today, it is okay to ask. But moving right along, when Megan was in high school, she met a man by the name of Darren West. And Darren was only a few years older than Megan when they started dating. He was like 21, she was 18. So I feel like this is a completely normal age gap, especially for these ages. But when Megan was 18 years old, she found out that she was pregnant. And by the time that Megan was 18, Darren was already out of high school and he had proposed to Megan very shortly after she finished high school. Megan was in love, so of course she accepted his invitation and agreed to do life with Darren forever. And the two were officially engaged to be married. The two got married pretty quickly after the engagement on April 3rd, 1993, and they officially became Mr. and Mrs. Darren West. Being young newlyweds was blissful, and life didn't seem like it could get much better for these two. Darren had finished high school and joined the Marine Reserves, and he was also attending college classes. And Megan and Darren were living with Darren's parents until they could get on their feet. But Megan had a secret brewing, and no one knew. Not her family, not her friends, and not even her husband, Darren. This secret that Megan was keeping solely to herself was that she was pregnant. And keep in mind now, Darren is the father of Megan's baby, and that she and Darren are already married, yet she is still keeping it a secret that she's pregnant. Megan had somehow been able to hide the fact that she was pregnant from everybody in her life. But she hadn't just been able to hide her pregnancy. No, that would be crazy. She had been able to hide the pregnancy for the entire term of her pregnancy. Megan was actually a full 9 months pregnant, and still, no one had the slightest clue that she was even expecting a baby. Now, Megan knew she was pregnant, she just didn't tell anybody else. And I've heard people say this 1,000 times, like, I don't understand how someone can go that long and no one noticed that they're even pregnant. But I'm here to tell you, I'm living proof that not everybody swells up, not everybody's feet gets massively swollen, and not everybody gets to have that big, huge, adorable baby bump. When I went into the hospital to deliver our first son, after I told the lady in triage the symptoms I was having, she asked if there was any chance that I was pregnant. Now, mind you, our first son was extremely premature and he wasn't expected to be due for another few months. So she's asking like, well, honey, do you think you may be pregnant? And I'm just like, yes, bitch, I know I'm pregnant. I've been pregnant for an entire 6 months now. I need a room and a doctor, please and thank you. Okay, maybe I didn't say those exact words, but I was most definitely thinking it. But even at 6 and 7 months alone, most people look pregnant. I did not look pregnant. If I wouldn't have told anyone, no one would have known. And I didn't look pregnant during either one of my pregnancies. Don't get me wrong, I definitely knew I was pregnant, and everybody around me knew I was pregnant, because I told them, duh. And I most definitely felt pregnant. I just didn't look pregnant. I looked a lot more like I had just eaten too much Taco Bell for lunch, like I was carrying around a food baby rather than a human baby. Like, not even big enough to just be a few weeks along, that's how small I was. I don't know what happened to my chunky ass now, but here we are. So anyways, I feel like I understand this more than most people about how nobody could know or recognize that Megan was pregnant. But I still couldn't find a reason as to why she chose to keep the entire pregnancy a secret. And I guess that's just something we may never know. Because I feel like if you're intentionally hiding the fact that you're pregnant from everyone in your life and everyone that you're close with, then there has to be a reason that you're keeping that secret. We just don't know what her reasoning was. Megan did eventually break down and tell Darren that she was pregnant, though, but she waited until she was already 9 months along and, seriously about to have this baby at any given minute before she decided to fill him in on the fun fact. Megan only told Darren, though. She still didn't tell any of her family, any of her friends, nothing. And then one day, Megan went into labor at home, and she ended up giving birth at home all by herself. So she delivered her own baby at home by herself, and somehow there were no complications, and both Megan and the baby were completely fine, thank God. But could you imagine being Darren and just one day Megan's like, hey babe, we need to talk, I'm 9 months pregnant, and I've been actively choosing not to tell you about this pregnancy or this baby, and I'm actually due any day, like maybe even today. And then he comes home from work a few days later and she's just sitting on the couch chilling, holding a newborn baby. Like, you had no idea that it was coming until a few days ago. Like, his mind must have been blown. It's not even my wife, and my mind is blown. Which I don't think that she gave birth and he just came in from work and his wife was holding a newborn in her arms. You know, a newborn that he just found out about. But I don't actually know if she went to the hospital after giving birth or what. And of course, after Megan had already given birth to their first daughter, that's actually when Darren and Megan's family and friends found out that she had been pregnant. It was after the birth of her daughter. So it was, of course, a shock to everybody, and everybody just kind of overlooked how weird this whole situation was. And they probably overlooked it because they had this new squishy baby to look at and eye at and fall in love with. And that's exactly what happened. Because after Darren's parents found out that they had a brand new granddaughter, they did the most grandparent thing possible. They offered to give their house to Darren and Megan so that they wouldn't have to stress so much about bills and, you know, keeping the baby in a stable home life. And Megan's only 18 years old still at this point. Darren's maybe 21, 22 at this point. So, of course, they accepted this offer to take over and live in Darren's parents' house. It would be free, essentially. And this would be the perfect way for the young couple to, like, get a leg up on parenthood and life as an adult in general. And from everything I read, it seems like they really wouldn't have very many bills. So Megan started doing side work like cleaning and babysitting to try to help bring in extra money. And Darren found work in some sort of field in the construction industry. And things seemed to be falling right into place for these two. And it was really confusing as far as Darren's work history around this time. I don't know if he only stayed in the Marine Reserve for a short period of time or, you know, what happened there. But somewhere after baby number 1 was born, Darren found work in the construction industry. But either way, the little family of 3 seemed to be doing just fine. But then something happened. And it was something that was going to make this couple's money a lot tighter, and it was something that would add a lot more stress and responsibility onto both Megan and Darren. Megan found out that she was pregnant again, and this was shortly after she had given birth to baby number 1. And I'm leaving their daughters' names out of this because they deserve some privacy. They didn't do anything heinous. Their mom did. So I'm actually just going to refer to them as babies number 1, 2, and 3 from here on out. So Megan gave birth to baby number 1 in 1993. And of course, that was shortly after she and Darren got married. And it was only 1994 when she gave birth to baby number 2, who was also a girl. So she had a baby back to back, and this becomes a running theme in this case. And sadly, they don't all turn out with this happy family ending. Because Megan is a literal monster. But we'll get there. So again, Megan's pregnant with baby number 2, and again, not a single solitary soul knows that she's pregnant. Not Darren, not her family, not her friends, no one. Like, she'd already fooled everyone in her world once with this big surprise pregnancy with baby number 1. What was the point in doing it again? I don't know, but she did. But this time with baby number 2, Darren wouldn't find out that Megan was pregnant this time until after the baby was already born. Yeah, I said that right. Darren didn't find out that Megan had been pregnant with baby number 2 until after she had already given birth. So now they have 2 babies, which was news to Darren. So 2 babies, and one that Darren didn't know about until right before she was born, and then a whole last second baby that Darren didn't find out about until after the baby was already here. And just like Megan had done with baby number 1, she also delivered baby number 2 at home in the bathtub by herself. A baby that absolutely nobody knew about. And somehow Megan had also been able to deliver baby number 2 at home all by herself, and again, there were no complications, nothing went wrong with this delivery or with the birthing process. And I just keep thinking, like, what are the chances that Megan just so happens to be home alone both times that she went into labor to deliver her daughters? Like, it seems like these circumstances worked out in her favor exactly the way she needed them to. Because she obviously didn't want anybody to know about the baby, or she would have told somebody. But the odds of having 2 healthy babies at home, while she just so happened to be there alone, that is just wild to me. And then again, Darren and all of their friends and family just kind of accepted the fact that Megan had hidden a whole nother pregnancy from everyone in her life again. But I honestly think that everybody that knew Megan just kind of chalked this up to her being such a private person, because everybody knew this about her. Like, everyone knew that she didn't open up about herself, her emotions, her thoughts, her feelings, nothing. So I guess they all just kind of figured that this was just something else that Megan had kept to herself. And things were going okay for a short while after Megan gave birth to baby number 2, but it wasn't long at all after baby number 2 was born that Darren and Megan started dabbling with drugs. And they weren't just smoking pot, they jumped straight into the hard stuff. The two started their drug habits by doing meth and taking prescription pain pills. So they jumped straight into the deep end with this addiction. And the only way that I can see this happening like that is if they had already been doing other recreational drugs. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but normally people don't just go from not doing any kind of drugs at all to straight into jumping into meth. And I know a lot about addicts and their behaviors and their patterns, and that's just not normally how that works. Again, it's not the most impossible thing I've ever heard, but I still find it weird. So let's move on. So the two were just dabbling in meth in the beginning, but this dabbling, like it does, quickly turned into an extremely expensive, extremely dangerous, explosive, full-blown drug addiction. It eventually got so bad and so severe that both Megan and Darren lost their jobs, which is a pretty normal thing that happens when somebody's on hard drugs. So this didn't really come as a big surprise to me. And it eventually got to a point where the couple was spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a day on their meth addiction. And all of this severe drug use and addiction started when their oldest daughter was about a year old or so, and their youngest was somewhere between like 8 and 10 months old from my guesstimation calculation dyslexic ass. So it got really hard to get accurate dates and ages for a lot of the kids that are involved in this case. And again, you'll see why it was so hard as we keep going, but we'll get there. So let's go back to Megan and Darren. They lost their jobs due to their drug use. So with neither one of them having a job, it was getting harder and harder to be able to spend hundreds of dollars a day on meth. And they're living in a house that Darren's parents had given them, so that seems to be how they were able to not have a job and still have a place to live. And that would also explain how they were even able to spend hundreds of dollars a day on their meth habit. But since neither one of them were working at the time and they obviously didn't have the money to buy meth anymore, Darren came up with a plan. And this plan would not only fuel the couple's drug habit, but it would also make it where the couple could do as much meth as they wanted, but it could possibly even be a way for them to bring in some money for their small family. So Darren decides that he'll just get the stuff and make meth at home and do it himself. And then Darren and Megan would have an ample supply of meth, and they could sell as much of it as they wanted in order to make some kind of money off of it. And if Darren was making the meth that they were using, then they would kind of cut out the middleman of the drug dealer, and whatever was left, they would be able to sell to people as a way of some kind of income. So this was Darren's genius plan to fix all their problems, because meth labs always work out great and they never blow up. And mind you, they still have 2 tiny daughters living with them. So it seems like the extreme drug use inevitably led to the once happy couple duking it out in the living room and actually fighting each other. Because things did eventually turn physical between Megan and Darren. And oftentimes, Megan would be with friends or family members, and she would either have like a black eye or bruises on different parts of her body, which would kind of lead me to believe that the kids had it pretty rough during this time, but it seems like that's not really the case either, because later on in this episode, when I get to what Darren and Megan's kids have to say about their parents and their childhood, they seem to remember a pretty happy childhood with two loving, normal, functioning parents and a home life. So I don't know if Megan and Darren were just good at hiding their fighting and arguing, or if the kids were so young that maybe they don't remember it. Either way, I'm not sure. I'm only telling you what I was able to find and verify through sources. And if nothing else, we do know that the drug use was happening, so maybe and Darren were both functioning drug users. I've seen that before, where people are able to seem and act completely like themselves and completely normal while being totally hammered on cocaine or meth or whatever their drug of choice is. What I do know is that there were never any charges filed against Megan or Darren for domestic violence, and there were never any reports to their address for domestic abuse or domestic violence. No neighbors ever called the police to report hearing fighting or screaming or threats. There was literally no sign of anything that was ever wrong inside of this house. And things would continue like this for the next few years. Darren started making meth that he and Megan were doing, and for the entire time, Darren and Megan were able to keep custody of both of their kids. And then in 1996, just like clockwork, Megan found out that she was pregnant again. This time with baby number 3. But unlike the other 2 pregnancies, Megan was using meth throughout the entirety of this pregnancy. Megan had been clean and sober for her first 2 pregnancies, and during her 3rd pregnancy, she was using meth daily. But some things never change, and just like she had done both times before, Megan wore baggy clothes that were too big and concealed this pregnancy from everybody around her, including Darren. Except this time, Darren wouldn't find out about this pregnancy or this baby for years to come. Megan was always a pretty reclusive person, and she stayed to herself and didn't really go out much. So no one knew about this 3rd pregnancy either, and even though Darren and Megan were living together, Darren somehow missed the fact that Megan was pregnant again. I know she used baggy clothes and things like that to hide any weight gain, but she also didn't go out much, and she stayed pretty much to herself, so I just don't see how many people would have noticed outside of her house. And then once again, Megan goes into labor, and she delivered her baby in the bathroom of her house all alone. Except this time, once the baby was born, Megan decided that she was too far into her drug use and that she wouldn't be able to provide and take care for another baby. So it was only minutes after she had given birth that Megan took her 2 thumbs and wrapped them around her tiny infant baby's neck and strangled it to death. Megan even later says that she used a hair tie, or like a ponytail holder, and she slid it over the baby's head and onto its neck. And I quote, just to make sure it was dead. So Megan had chosen her drug use and addiction over her newborn, and nobody was even the wiser. And I kept thinking this entire time that I was reading this, that if a hair tie would fit around a baby's neck, that goes to show you like a visual of how small they actually are. And again, how was she able to deliver a baby by herself at home with no assistance? And then, what are the odds that she just so happened to be home alone when she went into labor all 3 times? Like, you don't get to choose when your body goes into labor. Like, it's not like she got to choose to go into labor, and wait until everybody was gone to deliver. It just seems like these were the right circumstances for a really bad situation. And this baby, had she not killed it a mere 2 minutes after its birth, was born completely healthy and was carried to term. So she's just popping all these kids out at home with no hospital and no doctor and no nurses. Like, how is she going about her normal life without getting stitched up or checked out? Like, I don't understand how she was able to do this and get away with it for so long. So after Megan was sure that her tiny infant baby was dead, she wrapped the baby in a towel, and then she put the wrapped towel with the baby in it inside of a plastic bag like it was a dirty diaper. She then put that bag in a shoebox, and then from here, she put the shoebox with her now dead infant in it into a bigger box, taped the bigger box up with electrical tape, and she used a Sharpie to write the word Christmas on the side of the box. And she would store this box in the garage at the house where she and Darren and both of their toddler daughters lived. Darren had no idea that any of this had happened. After the baby was stuck in the garage like a box of old Christmas lights, Megan went back into the bathroom, cleaned up the mess from the childbirth, and went on about her daily life as if nothing had even happened. She was still doing meth daily, and she was still having unprotected sex with her husband, which is fine if you're going to be a responsible adult and take responsibility for any babies that you conceive because y'all don't want to use birth control or condoms. But Megan isn't about that responsible adult life because it was only a few short months before she discovered that, she was pregnant again. This is pissing me off. I'm sorry, y'all. And just like she'd done every time before this, Megan kept this pregnancy a secret from everybody in her life, and just like every other time before, that included keeping the pregnancy a secret from her husband, Darren. Megan would go on to carry this baby to term as well, so it's not even like she's giving birth to babies that are just a few weeks old or miscarrying them. She's carrying these babies for the full 9 months, and they're being born completely healthy and alive. So, would you like to take a guess as to where and how Megan gave birth to this next baby? I'll give you one guess. Yep, you guessed it. She gave birth in the bathroom at her house, except this time, when she went into labor and it was time to give birth, she wasn't home alone like she had been all these other times before. Because Megan and her husband Darren were at home together this time, and they had company over. Darren's brother and his wife were over watching TV at Darren and Megan's house. So now there are 3 whole-ass other adults in this house, and Megan is going to try to give birth to a baby without any one of them realizing it or knowing what was going on. And y'all will be absolutely floored to find out that Megan was actually able to give birth inside of a bathroom in a house where 3 other adults were, and not a single one of them heard or suspected a thing. Megan told Darren and her brother-in-law and his wife that she was tired, that she was going to go upstairs and take a bath and lay down early. And that's kind of what she did. She just forgot to mention the part about birthing a whole-ass baby and then murdering it a few minutes later. She just coincidentally left that part out. Megan again gave birth to the 4th baby that she's had in the bathroom floor by herself without anybody who was in the living room hearing or knowing anything. I just don't see how it's even possible. How did she just give birth and not make any noise? How did nobody go into the bathroom and check on her at any point through the evening? And most importantly, how is she still getting away with this? Megan again delivered another healthy baby that was alive and well. And she did the exact same thing to this baby after giving birth that she had done to the last baby. She strangled the baby with her bare hands and did the whole wrapping it in a towel, putting it in a bag, sticking that in a box, putting that in a bigger box, and then marking it with a Sharpie to say something that nobody would think to check, like Halloween decorations or Thanksgiving plates. And she went back into the bathroom and cleaned up the mess from the childbirth. From here, Megan went to bed after she cleaned the mess up in the bathroom, and she slept like nothing at all had just happened. Megan would continue this same pattern a few more times. She would get pregnant, hide the pregnancy from everybody, deliver the baby, kill the baby, put the baby in a box, put that box into a bigger box, and then label it something completely random, and then go back to her meth use and daily life as if it was nothing. So, from the year 1996 all the way up into the year of 2000, Megan was getting pregnant and giving birth at home alone and then murdering her newborn babies just minutes after they were born, only to store them in her garage in cardboard boxes. And she did this multiple times without anybody in her life suspecting a single thing was happening. But in the year 2000, Megan got pregnant again. Megan wasn't able to hide this pregnancy as well as she had been able to hide all the other ones. I'm not sure if she gained more weight and it was more noticeable, or if somebody somehow found out and then she had no choice but to tell people. I'm not sure how it came about that everybody found out that she was pregnant this time. But baby number 3 was also a girl. She was born healthy and carried to term. And I want to say she was also birthed in the bathroom. And for whatever reason, this baby was quote-unquote allowed to live. After all of the previous babies that Megan had birthed and killed were found, Megan was asked why secret baby number 3 was allowed to live. I used air quotes. And Megan said that since people had found out that she was pregnant with this one, that she wouldn't be able to just dispose of it without people asking questions. Like, y'all, she actually said that. She actually said that she only killed all of her other babies because no one found out that she was pregnant. So now Megan and Darren have 3 girls, and they're still actively using meth on a daily basis. After a live baby number 3 was born, the pattern that Megan had perfected continued. She would get pregnant about once a year, somehow be able to hide her pregnancy all the way up until she would give birth at home, alone, and then she would kill and hide the babies in the garage of the house that she shared with her husband and kids. Megan would get pregnant between 4 to 6 more times from 2000 to 2006. And you'll see later why I say that she was pregnant between 4 and 6 times in those 6 years. It'll all make sense. And during one of those home births, Megan did give birth on her bed, and I'm not sure how she was able to, sleep on that mattress again after that. Childbirth is messy. It's very liquidy. It's very gross. I don't know if she threw the whole bed out or if she got a new mattress or what happened. But if she got a new mattress, how the hell did Darren not notice that they got a new mattress? Come on now. But there's a lot of this story that just doesn't make sense, and things went on like this until 2005. Because in 2005, police showed up at Megan and Darren's house asking if they could take a look around. Apparently, police had caught wind that Darren was ordering all of these things online to make meth at home. So police are finally catching on to what Darren's been up to, and when police showed up and asked if they could look around the house, Megan agreed to let them come in. They searched wherever they wanted. Police looked around the house and even in the family garage. And even during this search, police were searching the premises now. They never found the remains of multiple babies that Megan had killed and stored in the garage. What police did find, though, was enough drugs and paraphernalia to be able to arrest Darren. Darren was eventually sent to court where he pled guilty in a federal court on 2 counts of possessing chemicals intended for the use of manufacturing methamphetamines. How the hell did the police do a full-blown search with a warrant, mind you, and not find multiple scalionized infants in a box? In multiple boxes? I don't know. But somehow the DEA and law enforcement both missed them. Okay, do better, DEA. That is ridiculous. A plea deal was made between Darren and the courts sometime in 2005. And then in 2006, Darren was sentenced to do 9 years in prison. After this sentencing, Darren tried to appeal his sentence a few times, and these appeals were basically just Darren saying that he never intended to sell the meth that he'd been caught making, that he was only using it for his own personal purposes and addiction uses. And of course, the courts were like, we're sorry, that's not how that works, and his sentence was upheld. Darren never named Megan during this trial, though, because he knew that if he did, that the courts would likely try to press charges on her as well, and that they would probably take their 3 kids. So Darren took the rap, and eventually he just accepted his sentence, and he took his punishment. Now, the plan, while Darren was set to be in prison, was that Megan would stay on the outside and wait for Darren to be released, because that's always the plan. The agreement with Darren's parents was that Megan and the kids could continue to stay in the house as long as Megan remained faithful to Darren throughout his 9-year prison sentence. Because remember, Darren's parents had been letting them stay in this, in their old house so that they wouldn't have to worry about a place to live, and so on and so forth. But now that Darren was going to be locked up for the next 9 years, the agreement had kind of changed some, and now Darren's parents were saying that, hey, you and the kids can keep staying here. Nothing is going to change on that end, as long as Megan could stay faithful to Darren while he was away on his 9-year sentence. So now with Darren in prison, Megan wasn't able to get the drugs that she was so used to having, and she was basically used to having like an unlimited supply. So she eventually got to where she had no choice but to be drug-free, and with Darren in prison, this would mean that there was no one there to get Megan pregnant, and thank God for small miracles, I guess, because it seems like since Megan couldn't get her hands on the drugs that she was used to, she just kind of turned to something that was more readily available. She started drinking. She just started drinking a lot more than she ever had before, and that kind of became her drug of choice. So she was drinking more, but she wasn't doing any hard drugs, so I guess that's a win. We take them where we can get them, right? I don't know. And things went on like this for quite a few years. Megan stayed faithful to Darren for multiple years, and she was able to manage to keep custody of their kids, and she wasn't really doing much besides drinking a whole lot more than she used to. But then in 2011, Megan kind of broke that agreement that she'd made with Darren's parents about staying faithful. Megan had started dating a man by the name of Jimmy. Megan met Jimmy at Smith's grocery store in Pleasant View, which is the town where Megan and Darren lived with their 3 daughters. And I wasn't really able to piece together a timeline of how long Jimmy and Megan had been dating before Darren's parents found out, because they did eventually find out that Megan had broken their agreement and that she wasn't being faithful to Darren anymore. So she had remained faithful to Darren for the first 5 years or so of his 9-year prison sentence, but then she'd started an affair with Jimmy, and Darren's parents did eventually find out. And I have questions, because how the hell did Darren's parents find out about the affair between Megan and Jimmy, and nobody could figure out that Megan had been pregnant 7 whole ass times in the last decade? I can't with that. We know you're sleeping with Jimmy, but we didn't know you were pregnant 15,000 times. All right, Mom and Dad, sit down. Megan had even attempted to hide a relationship with Jimmy so that her in-laws wouldn't find out that she was being unfaithful to Darren, because Megan already knew what the deal was. She knew that she could live there as long as she stayed faithful to Darren. So when Darren's parents did find out, they gave Megan the boot. Oh, girl, you got to go. And they told her, you got to go. They told her she couldn't stay in their house anymore. But Darren's parents did tell Megan that their 3 girls could still live in the house, but Megan couldn't. And don't ask me how that even makes sense. And also, don't ask me how this next part ended up happening, because I still can't figure it out. Because for whatever reason, Megan did end up leaving her 3 girls in that house after she moved out and moved in with her mom. And she only lived with her mom for a short time before she inevitably moved in with her new boyfriend, Jimmy. I mean, I guess Megan and Darren's daughters were older now. The oldest was 18, the middle one was 17, and the youngest daughter was 11. So, I mean, they are old enough to know what's going on. But one of the kids' aunt, or aunt, wherever you're from, however you say it, aunt, auntie, TT, she moved into the house with Megan and Darren's 3 girls after Megan moved out. And their aunt was kind of like responsible for the kids at this point, I guess. Like I said, don't ask me why Megan didn't take her kids with her or why the aunt moved in to live with the girls. I don't know, but that's what happened. Megan did still see the girls frequently, and she stayed in contact with them, so she didn't just abandon them once she moved out. So now, just to make sure I didn't just confuse anybody with that jumbled mess, Megan moved out of the house that she shared with Darren and that they had been living in that belonged to Darren's parents. She moved in with Jimmy, but she left her 3 kids in the same house that Darren's parents had been letting them live in. The kids' aunt or aunt moved in and started taking care of the kids. And this could have been something where Megan just didn't want to disrupt her kids' day-to-day life or like uproot them from the only home that they'd ever known. Or maybe she knew that her kids were safe with that aunt or aunt that was living with them. I don't know. This is just me speculating. But Megan and Jimmy actually seem to be doing really good together for the most part. And throughout the entire time that Megan's 3 kids were living with their aunt or aunt in this house, those babies were still inside the garage in those same boxes that Megan had first put them in. And still, even with somebody else living in that house, no one ever found those damn boxes. And I'm just wondering, how did no one ever walk into the garage and just be like, it smells pretty bad in here? Like, I don't understand how nobody managed to find these babies. Like, did they just skip those boxes of Christmas decorations every single year for 10 years? And Megan wasn't there anymore to stop somebody from picking those boxes up and going through them. So how were they not found when this aunt or aunt moved in to stay there with Megan and Darren's kids? I don't get how this was able to stay hidden for as long as it was, but here we are. So Megan and Jimmy had been living together for about 2 years when, you guessed it, she was pregnant again. But this time was different from any other time that Megan had ever been pregnant before. And mind you, she's been pregnant a lot. Because almost immediately after Megan found out that she was pregnant with Jimmy's baby, she told Jimmy the news. And remember, every time that Megan had been pregnant before with her husband Darren's baby, she would hide the entire pregnancy until the baby was almost due or already here. So I'm not sure why things were so different this time with Jimmy, but they were. Megan told Jimmy that she was pregnant as soon as she found out herself, and the two seemed excited. But unfortunately, Megan had to break the news to Jimmy later on that she had miscarried the baby. And of course, with Megan's previous track history of saying that she'd miscarried and lying to everybody about giving birth and murdering babies, people definitely wonder if this was an actual miscarriage or if Megan had fallen into old habits again and killed this baby immediately after giving birth. But I couldn't find anything that said that Megan went to the hospital for a miscarriage with this baby. But there's also never been an infant body found that was able to be matched to Jimmy through DNA. So basically, we don't have proof either way. We don't know if she actually did miscarry and, actually have a miscarriage this time, or if she carried the baby to term and birthed it just to kill it. And I almost wonder if maybe she waited until like a month before she was actually due, and maybe that's when she made it out to Jimmy like she had just found out she was pregnant. Like maybe she, was like, oh, I just found out I'm pregnant. But in reality, she's been so good at hiding pregnancies before that she could have easily been 7 or 8 months pregnant and just told him that she'd miscarried after she'd given birth and murdered the baby. I don't know. Again, this is just me throwing my thoughts out there. And I'm sure some of y'all were thinking the exact same thing. So this is already going to be a pretty long episode, so I'm going to skip ahead in the story to 2014 because nothing else of substance really happened after this possible miscarriage with Jimmy's baby. So in 2014, Darren is released from prison after serving the majority of his sentence, and he's going to be living back in the same house that he and Megan and their 3 kids had always lived in. The same house that belonged to his parents, and the same house where Megan had started a baby graveyard in the garage. Darren was excited to get his life back. He's ready to rebuild his relationship with his daughters. He's planning to change his life for the better. And I guess he decided that prison life really wasn't for him, which, good for him. So Darren kind of figures, what better way to start fresh than to deep clean the whole house and the garage and just make everything fresh and new. So on April 12th, 2014, Darren started tackling the task of decluttering his garage. He's looking through old pictures, finding things that he'd forgotten he had. He's also making piles of things to donate, throw away, or keep. And then he comes across a box. And this box is labeled Christmas, but it looks kind of weird. The box is wrapped in black electrical tape, and Darren says, what the hell, let's open it and see what all needs to be donated, thrown away, or kept out of this box. But when Darren opens the box, he is absolutely mortified. He opens the box and sees a plastic bag. He opens the bag and unwraps the towel, and that's when he saw the remains of a tiny newborn infant baby. Darren immediately called 911 to report what he'd found. So, of course, police are like, hey, buddy, we're on our way. Don't mess with anything else. And when Darren hangs up with police, he calls Megan's phone to tell her what he'd found. And during this call, Megan was on the phone with Darren and also in the same room with her new boyfriend, Jimmy. And both men were able to hear the absolute panic and fear in Megan's voice during this call. And Megan tries to explain this dead baby in a box away. She tells Darren that she had been pregnant years ago before he was ever sent to prison and that she either miscarried the baby or that it was a stillborn. And I saw both excuses in a lot of sources, so I'm not sure which one's accurate. But either way, she tells Darren that she freaked out and she was scared and she didn't know what to do with the baby, so she put it in a box. But either of her excuses don't really matter because either way, she's admitting to putting a dead baby in a box. So still on the phone, Megan explains to Darren that this baby had either been stillborn or miscarried when they were both in the midst of the highest point of their addiction and that she didn't know what else to do. Darren lets Megan know that he's already called the police before he'd even ever called her and that they should be pulling up any minute. Megan immediately hangs up on Darren and she turns to her boyfriend Jimmy and begs him for a gun. She tells him that she wants to take her own life and that if she can just use his gun that she'll pull the trigger, and of course Jimmy's like, hell no, what? And police do show up at the house, and when they went into the garage and saw that this wasn't a prank call and that this was an actual newborn that had been thrown in a shoebox like an old pair of Nikes, they headed straight to Jimmy's house where Megan was living. When police got there and took Megan in for questioning, she didn't waste any time before giving a full confession. Police eventually found a total of 7 infant remains that were scattered throughout the garage in different boxes. Megan confessed to strangling 6 out of the 7 newborns, and she told the police that one of the babies had been a stillborn. And police were able to confirm that, yes, one of the babies had in fact been a stillborn, which for anyone that doesn't know, a stillborn is where the baby is delivered after being carried full term and being born already dead. It's an awful thing that we all wish didn't exist, but it does, and that's just the sad reality of it. So, Megan had actually been telling the truth for once in her life. Police were able to determine that all of the other 6 babies had been strangled to death, and that the 7th baby had been stillborn. Megan would go on to tell police that she did have plans to move the bodies of the infants at some point, but that she wasn't sure how to move them or where to put them without being caught, so she just left them in the garage. There were 2 boys and 5 girls found in the garage in those shoe boxes wrapped in tape. And then Megan said something that just shows how often she was delivering and killing her own newborns. Megan told police that she was pretty sure that they should have found more than just 7 infants in the garage when they were searching. And this statement just tells me that this was such a habit for her that she had actually lost count of how many infants she had murdered. She had done this so many times that she couldn't actually remember to give an exact number. She had lost count of the number of babies that she had birthed and then murdered. What? How does your brain get that warped? I do not get it. It was later able to be determined that all 6 of the infants that she had killed had been murdered within 2 minutes of the time of their birth. After Megan's confession and after all of the infants and evidence were collected from the garage and from the house, a judge by the name of Stephen Hansen set Megan's bail for $1 million for every infant that she'd murdered. So her bail was set for either $6 million or $7 million. I didn't write it down, and I don't remember which way they actually charged her. But when investigators asked Megan why she would murder her own babies, she just tells them that the drug use that was going on, she just didn't feel like then like she could take care of and raise a baby in that environment. But let me just remind you that she did in fact let her 3rd daughter live. Megan's 3rd daughter was also born right in the midst of all of these other pregnancies. Hence, she was raising her in this drug-filled habit and environment. That is a bullshit excuse if I've ever heard one. There are also a ton of different ways and resources and options that she could have used aside from murder. And I'm actually just going to list those now because she actually did have so many options available to her. Option 1, use a condom. Option 2, get on birth control. That's easy enough. Another option, abstinence. Just stop having sex if you know you're that fertile and you also know that you plan to kill a baby if you get pregnant. Maybe you just don't have sex. She could have also had an abortion. She could have given the baby up for adoption. She could have gotten her tubes tied. She could have gotten during a vasectomy. And those weren't even all of her options because Utah and a lot of other states have what's called the safe haven law. This law protects parents who can't take care of their babies or don't want their babies or feel like their babies are in an unsafe situation with them. Like whatever the case may be, you can walk into a fire station, a police department, a hospital, and probably a fucking McDonald's, really. Anywhere that you can hand your baby to any one of the staff members that you see, you can then turn around and walk out. As long as your baby has not been abused or severely neglected, they don't ask your name. They don't ask you why you don't want your baby. They don't ask you anything. It is completely anonymous. They will take your baby have the hospital do some regular routine blood work and exams, and then they'll find a foster home or a couple looking to adopt, and your baby will be in a safe situation. She could have literally walked into a fire station and said, "Hey, I just had this baby at home in the bathroom. I can't keep it because no one knows I was pregnant." And the firefighters would have been like, "Okay, ma'am, we'll make sure the baby's taken care of. Have a good day." That could have been the end of it. So the fact that she chose murder over literally any of the other 18 options that she had just speaks to her character. She is a trash human. And then I've seen people talk about her being of the Mormon faith and pregnancies and yada, yada, yada. And I'm pretty sure that murder is looked down on in any religion. So there's that. But moving on, police were able to determine that Darren was the father of all 7 of the babies that had been found in the garage. And when Darren was asked about how he did not know that any of these pregnancies were going on, he said that he did actually know about a few of them, but that Megan had told him that she'd miscarried. And I don't think Darren's really familiar with how that works, because even if she had told him that she miscarried, there would have still needed to have been a doctor's appointment, there would have still been a fetus, there would have been some sort of evidence and proof of a baby. And Darren was even quoted saying that he was so high on drugs that he didn't care about anything but getting high, and that he didn't pay attention to his wife or his family, and that he was normally high out of his mind. And I've seen that. I've been around drug addicts. They can get so fixated on their addiction that they miss the most obvious things. So I'm almost convinced that Darren is being truthful just because I've seen it firsthand from people that were way too far into their drug addiction to even know what day of the week it is, much less know about anything else going on around them. During the times that Megan was carrying and having and killing these babies, nobody even knew she was on meth. Megan presented herself as a happy, healthy mom of 3, and people that were around Megan during this 10-year span said that she and Darren appeared to be normal, regular, all-American, good parents. Friends and neighbors would later say that even when she gained a little weight, it's rude to ask somebody if they're pregnant, and that she didn't look pregnant, she just looked like she'd gained a little more weight than she had had previously. Which, my weight fluctuates pretty frequently, and I've never been asked if I was pregnant. Megan's family, friends, and even neighbors did later say that they noticed that Megan's weight would often fluctuate, but that she would often go from wearing super baggy clothes that were way too big for her to wearing skin-tight, hot mom summer clothes. And police and even the public wondered how no one ever noticed that Megan was pregnant. But if you really sit and think about it, they were basically always seeing Megan pregnant. So it wouldn't be out of the usual for her to lose weight and then gain a little back. Like after you have a kid, that's a pretty normal thing that happens. Your weight just kind of does whatever it wants. But if she was literally almost always pregnant, then it wouldn't be weird to see her slightly heavier than she was last month. So I can totally see how no one was able to catch on to what was going on. It makes sense if you really sit and think about it. It's like little kids. You see your kid every day, and you don't really notice when they get a little taller or they gain a few pounds. But if your parents or your in-laws only get to see your kids 2 or 3 times a year, then they would definitely notice the changes in your kid's height and weight that you don't notice, just because you're around them every day and they aren't. So never mind, I just got on a tangent, I'm sorry. So back to Megan and her trial. These babies were all born and murdered between 1996 and 2006, and they all took place while Darren was still living in the home with Megan and their 3 daughters. Darren hadn't even been arrested and sent to prison yet, so that says how long ago it was. And with the level of decay, it was almost impossible to determine the order in which these babies were born. And it was also almost impossible for them to be able to determine the length of time between each baby being born. During the trial, 2 out of 3 of Megan's daughters did submit a letter to the court saying that they still loved their mom, and that she was always a great mom to them. They even went as far as to say that she was always a loving mom who made sure that they were taken care of, and not just some cold-blooded baby killer like everybody's claiming. And this is why I say that maybe Megan and Darren were pretty good functioning addicts, because if not, and if their kids were neglected and mistreated, I just don't think they'd be writing letters to the court backing their mom. So at the age of 40, Megan would go on to plead guilty to 6 counts of murder because one of the babies had actually been stillborn, so she didn't technically murder it, if we're being technical. And honestly, I wish we were being petty and not technical with this case. Then again, I don't really get a say-so, I guess. So she pled guilty to 6 counts of murder, and she was given additional time to serve because of the concealment of the bodies. Megan was sentenced to serve at least 30 years in prison and up to life in prison. The prosecutors on this case don't believe that Megan will ever get out of prison, and I sure as hell hope he's right. And that is all I have for you this week. Next week we'll do something a little less nauseating that doesn't even have a kid in any part of the story, good or bad. I recently jumped back on my TikTok to be able to update about cases. You can find me there by searching Mama Murdered a Podcast. And you can also find me by searching that same thing on Facebook and by searching murdered_mama on Instagram and Twitter. And I don't think I can possibly talk about this trash human any longer. So with that, let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then. Good Lord, I forgot to tell y'all that I went TikTok famous this week, and not even on purpose. There's also a guy riding a dirt bike up and down the road, so if you hear that in the background, just ignore it. I'm done recording the case. I just jumped back on to tell you how your girl got famous. Okay? So, yesterday morning, I got a call from a little boy, a video call. And I didn't answer it because I didn't know the number. It's a number that's local to me, but I don't answer numbers I don't know. But he just kept calling back to back to back. So, finally, I was like, maybe it's an emergency and, like, something's happened. So, I answered it. And this little tiny black boy, and he's like, hey, what you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just sitting here. What you doing? I'm watching Paw Patrol. Oh, I like Paw Patrol. I like Marshall. He's my favorite. And he's like, yeah, he's cool. Whatever. So we talked for a few minutes, and I'm like, so where's your mom? Does she know you got your phone? She's going to be mad. And he's like, oh, hers not here. And I'm like, oh, what about your dad? And he's like, I don't have a dad. And I'm like, yes, you do, but I get what you're saying. So brother, sister, grandma, anybody else there? No, Cece at school and brother at school and Nana's not here. Like, he's just going on. And I'm like, so who's there with you, man? What's up? And he's like, nobody. He tells me he's home alone. I'm like, oh, shit. Okay. You sure? There's nobody else there in the house with you? No. I'm like, okay, so what's your name? I asked this kid his name 100 times, it seems like. And every time he said it, it just seemed like one of those really long names with like 15 letters. Like a name that you would have to know how to like say in order to pronounce. And I'm assuming he wasn't able to quite pronounce it yet because I could not make it out for the life of me. So I tell him my name and, you know, he's like, all right, I'll call you back later, Miss Amanda. And I'm like, all right, buddy, call me anytime. Well, 3 minutes later, my phone rings again. It's the same little boy. So he's like, hey, what you doing? I'm like, nothing. Same thing I was doing a minute ago. What are you doing? Oh, I'm watching Paw Patrol. He's eating. I'm like, what you eating? He shows me a Pop-Tart. All right, so, but the video, I'm like looking at the ceiling. I'm looking at his forehead. I'm looking at his feet. I'm looking at the side of the couch. Like, he's a toddler. Like, I'm not able to see his face clearly in any of these video calls that we were on. But I kept asking him over and over and over. I'm like, you know, where's your mom? She's not here. Where's your dad? He's not here. And every time I ask him those same questions, he was giving me the exact same answers. So I got super worried. But then I remembered when my youngest was little, I was in the shower. He was supposed to have been watching videos on my phone. And somehow he calls a little old lady that lived, like, across the damn country, like, way in another state. And he comes in the bathroom and he's telling me about his new friend, Miss Linda or Miss Jean or whatever her name was. And then after that, you know, I talked to this elderly lady on the phone after I got my phone back from my son. And she asked me, like, oh, do you mind if I call him when I get bored? I think he's just sounds so cute. And I'm like, you know, it wasn't a video call when my son was doing it. It was a regular call. And I'm like, you know what? That's fine. He seemed to like talking to you. So when she would call, she would tell him about how she was making cookies or, like, what Christmas movies she had been watching and what, you know, new toys she had saw that she thought he would like, you know, whatever. It was adorable. It only lasted a few weeks, but it was so cute. I don't know what happened to her. She just quit calling. He quit calling her. I don't know. I guess they found a hobby. I don't know. So I started thinking back to that, and I'm like, his mom may be in the shower. She may be on the toilet. She may be taking a nap. She may work third shift and only get to sleep through the day when the baby's home. Like, I don't know. I don't want to just jump to the worst scenario, but I also know the outcome of something like that happening. He could have burned the house down. He could have walked outside, got kidnapped, run over by a car. Like, there's 1,000 different things that could happen if he is home alone and he's only 2. And I know he's only 2 because I asked him 5 different times, and every time he was like, yeah, I do. So I talked to this kid probably 5 or 6 times throughout the course of like 4 hours yesterday morning. And finally, at like 1:30, I was like, I'm going to call this number back. I'm going to video call this number back. Not just call. I'm going to video call and see if he answers the phone. And I figured while I was talking to him all throughout the day that I was at least able to know that he was in the same house and okay. I guess, I don't know, I was trying to like rationalize a reason to not call the police. But when I made the call, it got declined. And I'm like, I don't think my little buddy would be declining my call. It just doesn't seem like him. So I called back on a regular call. The voicemail sounds like a mom. I left a voicemail. I told her my name. I explained what had happened. I told her it wasn't a big deal. He could call any time or he could never call back. Either way, I just wanted to check and make sure that he wasn't actually home alone. I never got a call back. I never heard anything. And it was driving me crazy. It took me half the day to finish my research to even be able to record this episode because I could not do anything yesterday but sit and think about this kid. And eventually, I was like, I have to call the police. Like, there's no other option. I can't get in touch with a parent. I tried to call multiple times yesterday afternoon, and it just kept getting declined. Like, I don't know what else to do. So I made a TikTok because I wasn't sure how to get the police. I don't know where to send the police. All I have is a phone number. I make a TikTok and I'm like, hey, if anybody knows a way to help, like drop it in the comments. It would be appreciated, whatever. So I get, literally, there's over 1 million views on this video right now. I have gained over 20,000 followers in the last 24 hours. It has been ridiculous. I just quit checking all the comments and stuff earlier. Like, I can't keep up with all that. I ain't got time for that. So, but while they were only a few comments, I was reading them and trying to respond. And one lady was like, try this website. You can do a reverse search on the phone number. So I did. And I got a name and I got a city and I got 3 previous locations and their current location, their current address. So I called the police department. I explain what's going on. And they tell me they're going to do a welfare check. And if they can't get somebody to the door, they will report it to CPS that I won't have to be involved. And I was like, perfect, because CPS is against my religion. Unless your child is in like grave danger, I'm not calling CPS on you. Forget it. It's against my religion. So that's the whole how I blew up on TikTok overnight and wasn't even trying. But so go check me out, y'all. Your girl is blowing up over here. Okay, I probably won't be getting as many views and stuff in the next few days when it dies down, but I'm gonna live it up right now, son. Y'all just call me I don't know, call me something fancy. All right, I gotta go, guys. I gotta cook dinner. Bye.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.